Yeah.
As ever, the Speaker flatters me too much. I beg to move the motion under my name on the order paper. I spent a very large proportion of the last decade defending the police one way and another. Yet I've never experienced the time at which the public trust in the police is at a lower level. In my view, this is a tragedy, both for the vast majority of decent officers who joined up to catch criminals and protect the public, but also for the wider public too. But we have to deal firmly with those who bring the police into disrepute if we are to restore the reputation that most policemen properly deserve. There was a similar crisis of confidence as far back as 1918-1919, after the police strikes of those years. The first of them called during wartime, which caused a similar low perception of the standing of the police. The strike was ended after one day. The police were granted a considerable pay increase, but as a result, as a vital service, they were forbidden both membership of a trade union and the right to strike. The government effectively established the Police Federation in place of a union to represent the concerns of police officers around the country. It gave a statutory closed shop, which lasts to this day. Now, there is no doubt that the Police Federation had a noble beginning, and for many years it was a constructive force behind British policing, raising the reputation of the British copper to the position it ought to hold. Regrettably, the Federation today is a bloated and sclerotic body and has acquired the worst characteristics of the worst trade unions that we thought and hoped we'd seen the end of in the 1970s. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Would he share my concern that this whole issue around the representation of the police is a matter that goes across boundaries? It's a matter of concern to police rank and file on the ground, with their confidence shaken, also to the public and to politicians. But it's a matter that should be shared across the House and beyond the issue of party politics. And one of the concerns is no doubt that, unfortunately, the Federation have engaged in party politics, have politicised themselves in their actions. And what we need is to share across the House our concerns. And therefore it is disappointing that it's only on one side of the House that there are members in number to engage in this debate.
Yes. Well, I accept one aspect of what my honourable friend says. I mean, he himself has had cases that relate to misbehaviour of police officers in his own constituency, and he has done a great deal to defend them, sometimes not always with the help of the Federation. However, if the front bench would like to intervene on me, I'll happily take an intervention. So there is an issue there of the breadth of appeal of this. However, I don't want to make this a party political issue. There are at least two members sitting on the backbenches now who have very strong views on these matters. One of them has had a joint motion with me in the past. The other one, of course, is the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee. And so I would not make it a political issue. I think actually we all have something to gain. All sides of this House have something to gain from the police being truly apolitical and truly upholding our democracy rather than interfering in it in the wrong way. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Thanks, my right honourable friend, for giving me. Would he agree that leadership comes from the top, and that in the case of the police, the Association of Chief Police Officers has just not given leadership from the top, and many of the issues in this excellent report are reflected in the criticisms that can be made of the Association of Chief Police Officers as well.
Well, my honourable friend has a point. I don't want to broaden this to a complete all police issues matter, but he's right. ACPO, as its acronym is badly constituted. It should never have been set up in the way it is, and there are signs that it should have done more to lead firmly. We saw this particularly in the West Midlands cases, where the various chief constables were perhaps not as strong in upholding justice as they should have been. So he has a point. And that brings me really to the Federation itself, because and the point I want to make here is I'm talking about the National Federation primarily, also some of the regions, but primarily the National Federation. And I say this because some of the local federation organisations do a very good job on very, very thin resources to represent, as they properly should, the interests of their members. But there are many criticisms, nevertheless, to be levelled at the Federation as it is today. These include that the Federation is inefficient and wasteful, with duplication of tasks and structures. It's profligate, spending its members' money on grace and favour flats and huge bar bills. It's badly governed, with no apparent strong leadership to guarantee direction and stability. And it behaves in a manner which sometimes brings the police forces into disrepute by pursuing personal and political vendettas, the sorts of things my honourable friend was referring to, against prominent public persons and bodies, and legal actions against private citizens, sometimes even the victims of crime. After the Police Federation's attack on my right honourable friend, Andrew Mitchell, the view of the public, and damningly the view of the Federation's members as well, was that the Federation had to change. So even...
my right honourable friend and
I will give way to my honourable friend,
my right honourable friend. Given his reference to our right honourable friend, I wonder if he has a comment on today's front page of the Times, which I'm sure he's seen.
Well, again, I do not want to widen this into a rerun of the Mitchell case, but let me say a couple of things about this. The House knows full well that I didn't really approve of the Leveson process. I'm a believer in a free press, and very strongly so. But even I am astonished that after Leveson, we see yet again a police force leaking a confidential document, which actually the victim in this, my right honourable friend, has not had access to, leaking it in an incredibly spun way. So, first off, I expect the Metropolitan Police Commissioner to have a proper leak inquiry into that, and I've told him that this morning. The second point I'd make is the astonishing interpretation put upon the leak that was given. Because what this leak showed was that an officer, 4 hours after stopping my right honourable friend, or attempting to stop my right honourable friend, going through the main gates of Downing Street, 4 hours afterwards, so not in a panic, not in a rush, in a premeditated way, calling up or writing to his seniors, not to say, we have a security issue here, would somebody please have a conversation with Mr Mitchell to make sure that he understands we can't let him through, which would be the proper thing, which I think any of us would have done, but to set up a circumstance where it will be resolved by a public confrontation at the front desk, at the front gate, and ensuring that his seniors support him in doing that, which, if anything, actually reinforces the story we were told by an anonymous whistleblower that this was a premeditated action. So I think today's press coverage was not very good reflection on the police in two ways. It undermined their main case, but also it's something they simply should not have done under these circumstances. But if the House will forgive me, I will try not to rest too much on the Mitchell case, because it simply is only one of many cases in which we have reason to be concerned about the role of the Federation. So the Federation appoint... I will give way. I can't tell it's the last day of term, can I? I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend. In fact, I think he's quite right and does agree with me that, as the Normington Report sets out very clearly, the Mitchell case is really just one illustration of the frankly pretty flagrant and endemic bullying and harassment that goes on often amongst the Federation's own members, whether it's online or in personal contact, and that's set out very clearly in the report.
Honourable friend and old friend is entirely right about that, and I will elaborate on in some detail on some of those measures in a minute. But I start by saying that the Federation chose a very good person to write the report. David Normington, a distinguished ex-permanent secretary at the Home Office, is classical Whitehall Mandarin. If anything, more tempted than most to be careful about his language, sober about his language, and if anything, they were tempted to pull his punches in his description of these things, or at least mitigate the way he describes them. But it seems to me that it's in the best interests of police officers across the country that we reveal very clearly, and perhaps in starker detail than Normington did, very, very clearly the extent to which the Federation has failed. Now, even in its sober language, the Normington Report was utterly damning, as my honourable friend intimates, for the Federation's performance, and it made 36 recommendations focused on returning professionalism, democracy and efficiency to the Police Federation. Now, to fully understand the extent of the problem, we should examine a number of areas where the need for reform is particularly apparent. It's a matter of great concern that the Police Federation is as profligate as it appears to be. And there are numerous examples of that. The Federation spent 26 million building its leather headquarters. Frankly, extravagant enough to do justice to one of the London merchant banks at the height of the city excesses. With a hotel, a bar, indoor swimming pool, and 11 grace and favour apartments. Even more outrageous is that members' subscription fees, because of the cost of that, had to be raised by 23% to pay for that extravagance. The Federation's officers, with their salaries still paid by the respective forces, received salary enhancements of up to £25,000 from the Federation. Enhancements are doing what is, after all, an easier job than being on the cold streets of Britain at night, and night shifts and so on, sitting in their luxury headquarters than performing public duty. And I've been told that full-time Federation officers have free use of those grace and favour flats, live on company credit cards, purchases of large quantities of food and alcohol on these cards are apparently not uncommon. Now, to put a number on this, the accounts show a provision of £2 million in a tax dispute with the HMRC. Now, if, as I understand it, that provision is to meet any tax liability, the taxes are 40%. What that says is that there are £5 million of claims that have been made, £5 million, which were perks and maybe unjustifiably claimed as a proper expense, which is of itself astonishing. Now, only a couple of days ago in the newspapers, a police widow, I think herself a serving PC, if the report was right, said that Federation officials treated memorial services, those most important and high gravitas of occasions, treated memorial services, quotes, like a drunken jolly getting drunk on Federation credit cards. She went on to say that their drunken excess upsets families every year, so this is not an exception. I've heard similar allegations about the behaviour of Federation officials at conferences, with individual bar bills of hundreds of pounds being again charged to Federation credit cards. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful for my old friend giving way. Just before he moves on from memorials, would he agree with me that the money might be better spent in actually restoring the damaged National Police Memorial on the Mall, which still remains broken and damaged in many parts? And that would be a fitting tribute to those brave and dedicated police officers, which of course form the majority.
Well, that would be, that's an extremely imaginative suggestion, if I may say so, but I have my own ideas as to what should happen with respect to this money, but I think my honourable friend makes a point that should be taken into account by the House. Now, in these assertions I've just been putting in front of the House, I've been dependent on whistleblowers to a large extent, people who quite bravely have come forward having been shocked by what they've seen. And of course, police whistleblowers are particularly at risk, and so they're very, very loath to come into public domain, which makes it hard to check what they've said, of course. So, as a result, I call for the Federation to publish their expense accounts and live up to the generally expected standards of transparency. And as I say, the reason I did this was to be able to confirm or deny for myself whether these claims were correct or not. The Federation, as far as I'm aware, have not published these expense accounts, these credit card accounts and so on, and so this leads me to believe that the whistleblowers are right in their assertions. Now, it's up to the Federation's members themselves at the end of the day whether they consider this profligacy acceptable. At the end of the day, mostly it's their money, not entirely, but mostly it's their money. But they cannot make that judgment unless they know exactly what's been going on, what's been done in their name with their money. So that's another reason that we should see total transparency in these accounts. The other reason is the interests of my right honourable friend on the front bench, the representing the Home Office. The simple truth is that we also put taxpayers' money into the Federation because properly it's there to do a function which we want to see done. And therefore it's also taxpayers' money that may be being wasted in some of these conferences. Now, the Federation appears to have a real problem with that transparency, however. It's very telling that the Federation failed to answer even Sir David Normington's requests about the so-called number 2 accounts. These are accounts that the various branches use, which they get, where they get money from selling insurance and then keeping a rake or keeping a commission from the insurance that they sell. And yet they have not so far been willing or able to provide the information that Normington asked for. And they, I understand, probably account for £35 million of assets just sitting around the country. Again, this is money that belongs to serving police officers, not to the organisation. Now, also, contrary to the, on the question of transparency, contrary to the claims of the Federation earlier this week, the full details of the 11 Grace and Favour apartments are not published in their accounts. They said they were, they're not. I won't spend a great deal of time on this, but I'd recommend to colleagues that they read Note 3 of the Federation's accounts. I'll save you the time looking it up. It's Note 3 of the Federation accounts. That's the only reference, and they do not contain details that I would recognise as telling us that these are Grace and Favour accounts used for the benefit of Federation officers with or without the approval of their own members. Now, it's very clear that the Federation does not really know what transparency means, but it can only restore trust in itself if it imposes real transparency on all its operations as a matter of urgency. Now, the Federation's use of funds raises something else too. It has formidable financial muscle. I guess its total assets, if you include everything, comes to about £70 million, something of that order, with the majority of that income in subscription fees, but some in the number 2 accounts. Now, the last set of audited accounts showed the Federation with a surplus, over and above all the costs, all the profligacy I've been talking about, a surplus of £3.5 million per annum. In addition, in the costs, you see about £10 million spent on administration, including the profligacies I talked about, but most astonishingly, you see £8 million spent on legal actions. £8 million every single year. In addition, you see a number of active cases where there are provisions for individual cases, going up to £1 million, in one case up to £1 million, others 350,000, 450,000, provisions against possibly losing a case. Now, let's understand something. We have the member for Tottenham here. He would understand very well that there are good reasons sometimes for the Federation to act vigorously on behalf of its members. In the Duggan case, there will be very, very big legal interests and individual interests in play, and it's entirely proper that that should happen. And so I do not in any way criticise that element of legal defence, although I have to say it ought to be through an insurance function rather than just the discretion of a Fed rep, but never mind. Legal action, therefore, is justifiable. However, there are many occasions when aggressive litigation should not be carried out against those bringing complaints against the police. Chris Mullin, the distinguished predecessor of the Home Affairs Select Committee chairman, has previously said that whilst most unions will not act on behalf of one of their members clearly in the wrong, the Federation had a long track record of defending the indefensible and will gleefully launch claims against the victims of crime. Two recent examples of the Federation's appetite for litigation were PC Kelly-Jones, who sued a burglary victim after she tripped on a curb outside his garage, and PC Richard Seymour, who sued another burglary victim after falling over a drain on his property. In both instances, it was the Police Federation that assisted in progressing the claims, despite the pleading of senior officers that such claims were detrimental to the image of the police force. Now, in the case of PC Kelly-Jones, this is press reportage, so I can't be sure of it, but in the case of PC Kelly-Jones, the Federation has been accused of pressuring her into making the claim when she had no desire to do so. I hear from other whistleblowers that this is not uncommon, that members of the Federation are actively encouraged to make claims which members of this House might view as inappropriate. Of particular concern is that the Federation is pursuing...
Order. Before, could I just very gently remind the honourable gentleman that the recommendation from the backbench committee for the opening speech is 10 to 15 minutes. He's now been speaking for 20. There are 10 members who wish to participate in this debate, and there is another debate this afternoon. So I know we're all hanging on his every word, but if he could bear in mind that there are other people, I'd be grateful if he might consider concluding soon.
Absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been generous with interventions, of course, but I understand only too well.
I have to tell the honourable gentleman that that does not count. It's not qualified in any way. 10 to 15 minutes. Been very generous, but the same honourable gentlemen are wishing to speak in this debate, and they will want to have a reasonable time to participate.
I will be absolutely as brisk as I can, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, there is... Let me come back to really, and what in some ways the most serious point in this debate. The bringing of defamation cases against people who disagree with the police's version of events. There's no downside to a police officer when he pursues a libel action backed by the enormous resources of the Fed. And this raises two distinct and concerning issues. Action against the press, who must hold the police to account, is utterly against the interests of a fair and free society, except in very clear-cut circumstances. And secondly, action against members of the public whom the police are charged with protecting, who disagree with the police's version of events. This insulates the police from criticism and from being held to account for what they do. These actions are ones which should not actually come into being. If the Federation is using its financial might to crush legitimate claims against officers, or worse, pursue those who have already been subject to even a police stitch-up in the extreme, then this would be a huge injustice. Indeed, it would compound existing injustices. My final point, Madam Speaker, on this, before I come to a conclusion, is to quote the Normington Report on the politically motivated campaigns. They said, throughout our inquiry, we've heard allegations that some Federation representatives who have personally targeted successive Home Secretaries, Andrew Mitchell, Tom Windsor and others, bring the Federation into disrepute and risk the police reputation for impartiality and integrity. If the Federation wants to be respected and listened to in the future, this has to stop. Such actions are completely unacceptable and are contrary to the purpose of the Police Federation. So finally, what to do? When considering whether or not the progress of reform should be left to the Federation, there's two very simple points to bear in mind. Is it the interests of the officers that's being pursued, who of course have got something to lose and a cushy job, a good pay, a good arrangement for them, or the interests of the members? And it's vital that the members themselves are properly represented. Last week, Fiona McElroy, a former Principal Private Secretary, brought in to help the Federation achieve the reforms, was fired. Her deputy also left the Federation in outrage at her treatment. So I'd ask the Minister to give the Federation an ultimatum, two ultimata. Number one, they should immediately sign up to Recommendation 1. That is, accepting the revised core purpose to act in the public interest with public accountability alongside accountability to their own members. That's point one. Point two, they should accept all of the other recommendations of Normington before their triennial elections this year, before they lock in place a whole set of officers for another 3 years. And if they don't do that, then the government, I think, is properly authorised to intervene. And in my view, if it does that, what the government should do is Normington Plus. It should put in place all of the Normington proposals, but in addition, it should act to deal with the profligacy and misuse of public and members' money. And that means, I'm afraid, selling Leatherhead, centralising the money and giving back to the members the funds that the Federation has inappropriately used in the last several years. That would be about £500 a member, and it would mean that would still leave a viable federation. That is how we can make the Police Federation serve their members, but equally important, serve the public of the nation that their members are there to uphold.
The question is, as on the order paper, I see I now